I'm Doug Fearn, and this is my take on music recording. And today I'm talking to Taylor Larson, founder of MixWave and also a Grammy-nominated engineer, producer, mixer, and guitarist. And Taylor, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Likewise, glad to be on.
Just to give us a little background in your history, could you give us a little bit about how you ended up in the music world? And then we can specifically talk about what you're doing today. But I'm always curious about how people got started in our industry.
Sure. So for me, I guess it kind of started with my parents. I believe I was 3 when my dad gave me a guitar. And I mean, I don't even remember learning how to play the guitar. It just came natural. I was playing songs super young. It's kind of no different than speaking or walking for me. And so I grew up playing guitar, never had lessons or anything like that, but I really loved it and put a lot of time into it. And I'm originally from, we'll say, like the Silver Spring area of Maryland, kind of near DC.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 10, I moved to the Eastern Shore, near the ocean there. And there was quite a music scene there that I grew up in. And I kind of joined a band as soon as I got into, I want to say, 9th grade. And my dream was always to be a famous guitar player. And so I got the opportunity to tour. I actually dropped out of school in 11th grade to go tour. And when I came back in 12th grade, I had to go to school and night school. So I'd get home from school and then I'd go to school again to make up for it. But what happened was I got the opportunity to go tour. And I found out that I really hated it. I like performing, but you don't get to eat good food. You don't sleep well. Sometimes you're sleeping in the van, especially when you're starting out. And I always felt homesick. I didn't like traveling all the time. And I really just, from there, life kind of presents you with different paths and opportunities. And I would say my strong suit is kind of analyzing the opportunity and knowing when to pivot or strike. And so I kind of had this thing where it was like, well, I don't like touring. I love writing music with people. Well, you can do that as a producer, and you don't have to just be in one band. You can write with anybody. And you can have a studio, which is your home base where you feel comfortable. And you can have all of the things that you love about being in a band, but then you don't have to tour. And so I kind of pivoted, I wanted to be a famous guitar player. And then I saw that being a record producer, that it would be more lucrative, but I would be able to work in music in the same capacity that I loved, but maybe you don't care quite as much about the fame, You want to be a famous guitar player, you want to be known. Well, if you're a producer, you're not really known as part of the band. So I was fine with that, and that was kind of how I pivoted from wanting to be in a band to, well, I can be on the other side of this.
That's interesting, and I think there's a lot of people I've come in contact with over the decades that have a similar story in so many ways. A lot of us start out the same way, make our choices as we experience what the music business has to offer, and, like you say, pivot into something that really appeals to us. What led you into creating plugins and samples?
So this is the same kind of thing. If I look at like how much effort and time I put into being a guitar player in a band and then pivoting into, okay, well, I'm going to be a producer now. Well, I kind of had the same thing that happened I want to say I was a producer somewhere between 10 to 15 years before I pivoted into plugins. But I had something happen where I wasn't in love with the music that I was working on. And a little backstory on me is early on in my career, I got to record this band that was kind of local to me, and the record blew up. It did really well. And they were a metal band, and I wasn't necessarily a metal person. I respect metal for the talent that it has in it, but it probably accounts for maybe 20% of what I actually listen to. And so I kind of got stuck doing a lot of things in that genre because of the success of the first record I did. And it kind of, it paid really well, and I kept getting bigger and bigger bands in that genre. And so you kind of get stuck in there. But what happened was I was kind of not in love with the music towards the end that I was working on. And I was starting to get a little burnt out, a little jaded, because like a lot of these bands, I would have to write their music for them, or I could tell that they were just doing it, for Instagram or TikTok or this or that. And that I'm after integrity and passion. I love to like pour myself into something. And so what happened was, being frustrated in that, there was a point where I was talking to a software company about doing signature mixing plugins with them. And so I sat down, I drew all these signal flows and how I wanted the plugins to be. And at the time, the company was doing a lot of advertising, and I just thought it looked so cheesy and kind of weight loss scam, swipe up if you want to lose 20 pounds kind of marketing. And I thought, I don't really want to put my name on this. And I went to somebody who I was very close with, which was Jeff Cohen, and he was the owner of a record label that I had done a lot of work for. And he was also a very successful entertainment lawyer. I mean, he'd worked for Van Halen and a number of other successful acts. And so I knew him from that, and we had bonded and spent a lot of time showing each other music, and he had showed me a lot of great music. And essentially what happened was, I went to him and I said, "Hey, Jeff, I was going to do these signature plugin with these companies, or this company. Can we do this ourselves?" And he said, "Yes, I'd love to do this. Let's set out and find the dev team." And he had a lot of experience running record labels. So like we were able to kind of have the infrastructure, and he kind of had the understanding of like, we want to work with brands, but we want to really benefit the brands too. I mean, you're coming from somebody who's had a lot of success, who doesn't need to like, give people bad deals or anything like that. So we made a really fair model and really kind of prided ourselves on working with these brands and having it be the kind of thing where it's like, if we're going to do a compressor, we'd like to do it with the person who actually designed the compressor, not make, some knockoff and try to kind of steal their money, So I went to him, and this was right around the COVID thing. And so as everybody was stuck at home, and it was kind of the perfect time to say, you know what, I'm going to take a little bit of a hiatus from recording because I'm feeling a little jaded and kind of wasn't in love with what I was working on. And the beauty in software is, if I make a tool that sounds amazing, then I can be proud of it, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with what I'm working on. It could be a tool that somebody else could use on something I love. And I'm sure for you, making the hardware, you can relate 100% because you have people using your stuff on incredible records that you get to listen to. And that's kind of the feeling, right? I mean, how do you relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for many years I had a studio, and this was in the 70s and 80s, and the majority of our business was record labels. You know, we did albums.
Yep.
And that gave me an opportunity to work with some really, really talented people and a lot of really good producers. You know, I learned a lot from them. I enjoyed it. Most of the projects were a lot of fun, but there were also projects where I just said, I'm not sure I want to be doing this forever.
Yeah.
And one thing that occurred at a session, I had finished up a session. We were all night long punching in background vocals, and it was just tedious and never really sounded good. And I sat there, everybody was gone. I was cleaning up the control room, and I turned around, and in back of me is a Studer 24-track 2-inch tape machine with Dolby noise reduction units. And I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, you know, I paid more for that than a house costs. I could buy a nice house. And it sort of snowballed into, why am I doing this when I really wanted to be doing something different? So I sold the studio. I hung on to a bunch of equipment because I was still doing sessions at other studios, just projects I wanted to do, not ones that just came in the door. So I never stopped recording. But one of the things was that gave me an opportunity to think about, what is it about the sound that I'm getting at these other studios, or even in my studio for that matter, that could be better. And that led to developing our first product, which was, a vacuum tube mic preamp, which we still make. From there, it went to equalizers and then compressors and then some variations on those things. It gave me the tools that I always wanted.
Yeah.
And that was just like the best thing in the world. It just spoiled me. And I'm sitting in my control room now, which is 100% DW Fearn and some Hazelrig Industries products. Everything is vacuum tube. The only solid state stuff in this whole room are the analog stages of the converters.
Yep.
And the amps for the monitor speakers. But in the actual signal chain, it's basically 100% vacuum tube. So, that just really pleased me. And I guess probably the most gratifying thing about my end of the business, the manufacturing part of it, was that people that I had been fans of and loved their music for ages were using my gear. That's
It's
pretty
amazing.
cool. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. And not only using it, but it became an important part of their recording technique. So that was great. So I can relate, to what you went through in your path.
Before, when I was a producer, that's what I did full time. Every month it was a new band and I booked things out and I relied on that for a living. Well, now that I've kind of taken a hiatus and turned MixWave into what it is, I can go back to producing and I can be selective. And also, like I could tell you recently, there was a band I was really big fan of growing up, and I started working with them. And in the middle, I realized, you know what? I can't make the record that I want with them, due to the politics of how their band is being run. And I don't want to do them a disservice, so I can just walk away. I have the power to say, you know what? I don't want to work on this. Before I had to work on it. So it's like, I'm sure for you, now that you have something else, you have the studio, and it can just be like, it's like money isn't the reason you're doing it, and you don't have to do something. So therefore you can do it more passionately and just do it. The motivation is different. You relate to that as well.
Absolutely. Because I never stopped recording, but it was such a minor part of my day because running the manufacturing company took a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
And, because basically I ran it by myself. I had 5 or 6, it varied a bit, assemblers that actually built the units, because everything we make is made in the USA by our people. Several years ago, I licensed the manufacturing to George and Joff Hazelrig, because Joff had been an assembler for me for many, many years. And I knew those guys so well because we have so many things in common.
Yeah.
They're superb musicians, and I used to use them a lot on sessions. So that was pretty much a no-brainer. So they've done a great job with the company, which frees me up to develop new products and to do recording.
I think the cool thing that I'm talking to you is that you've managed to make something new that actually hangs with those things. Because I've tried a lot of clones, I've tried a lot of modern companies, things of doing this and that, and you compare it to the original and it's always kind of brittle sounding, it's always kind of shrill, it kind of has nasty teeth to it. But you've managed to make something modern that can still hang with the old stuff. So I guess 2-part question. One, why is that old stuff always better? Was it that people were just smarter, the engineering, better manufacturing? I don't know. And then secondly, how have you found a way to make modern gear that doesn't sound like all the other modern gear?
Well, I think, let's take the RCA 44 as an example, because it's something I know quite a lot about.
Yep.
I've been able to go through Harry Olson, who was the scientist really at RCA who developed that mic over a period of years, took years. That was pioneering. He was on the forefront of science developing this microphone. And I think the key thing for him was, first of all, he knew what the application had to be, which was primarily designed as an all-purpose mic. They saw their main market as broadcasting, because radio was relatively new and, it was the dominant entertainment medium of the time.
Yep.
And so it had to be versatile enough that it could be used for an announcer, it could be used for guests in an interview that didn't really understand microphones. It had to be good for recording music. So when he was developing it, he not only had to develop the technology for making measurements, because nobody really had a way to measure the performance of a microphone. He had to build anechoic chambers and the test equipment to try to characterize what the mic was doing.
Yep.
He did all that, and I think this is the key thing, he listened to it, because RCA owned the NBC radio network, so he could take a prototype to New York and listen to it on, the top announcers, on the top singers, on the top orchestras, and just hear how did it sound? Did it capture the essence of that music accurately? That microphone, was designed not only in a very sophisticated, state-of-the-art laboratory, but also by somebody that knew what it was supposed to sound like and realized the measurements didn't matter if it didn't sound good.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the same approach that I took. When I wanted to build a better microphone preamplifier, I was pretty convinced I wanted to use tubes, because I don't want to tell the story now because I've told it so many times before, but it basically was my utter, total disappointment and regret when I got my first console, which of course was solid state, and I couldn't believe how bad it sounded compared to what I was used to.
Oh, wow.
But I had other ones after that were, big name consoles, and they sounded better than that first one.
Yeah.
But they never sounded right to me. And so I knew I wanted to use tubes. it was also when I was developing this in the early 90s, digital was starting to become, obvious solution to the next step in recording technology.
Yep.
And instead of dealing with a 65 dB noise floor in a tape machine, now you had at least 100 dB noise floor. And instead of having 5 to 10% distortion in the tape machine, now you were down to, well below 1% distortion.
Yeah.
So there was no incentive for those old designs to worry about that. It didn't matter how noisy it was. I mean, it couldn't be awful, but, they didn't have to have, minus 80 dB noise because the tape machine would have all the noise.
Yeah.
And they didn't worry about the distortion because the tape had so much more distortion. But for digital, I wanted it to preserve the characteristics that made that old gear sound so good, which is basically vacuum tubes, but had the specifications that made it viable in the digital recording world. Back then, they got it working and it worked well enough, and that was it. That was the end of the design. But I always kept trying to find something better. The parts that were available today are so much better. Sure, the old transformers had a particular sound, but there's times when you want that transformer sound to be a signature part of what you're building. But on the other hand, if you can just make that transformer as transparent as possible, then that's even better. My goal was to eliminate all the irritants. And the irritants to me were the brittleness, raunchiness sound of solid state.
Yeah.
And the deficiencies in the components and design of the old vintage vacuum tube gear. So I was really pleased when I finally came up with something. I said, wow, this actually does what I want it to do. And that same philosophy applied to everything. And when it came time that I was designing the VT-4 and VT-5 equalizers, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted it to do. But the main thing was I wanted to know how it sounded. So it was interesting that in the whole development of those equalizers, I never measured the curves of those. I had no idea. They were just what sounded right to me.
I love that.
Yeah. And originally I was just going to label the frequencies A, B, C, D, and the booster cut numbers is 1 through 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
And not put dB or put the hertz or kilohertz on the knobs. I sort of chickened out on that eventually, but the numbers that are on there are just kind of arbitrary. I mean, they give you a sense of where this thing is working in the frequency domain. They give you a sense of how much booster cut, but they're not precise.
Yeah.
It's what made sense, And I had the advantage of using it in the studio on real projects and saying, how does this work? Does this work on a vocal? Does this work on, a kick drum? Does, whatever it might be. It still astounds me that there's a market out there for people that hear things the way I do, which is...
Well, I was going to say, I think it's kind of crazy that you designed what you liked, what worked for you, and especially for like the genres that you work on and that you like, and now you have all these people out here using it on all kinds of stuff, all kinds of genres that maybe you weren't even thinking of or that you personally would never use your equipment on. I mean, that's kind of incredible, right?
It is pretty amazing. And, I would get feedback from customers, some pretty big name people in the business, and tell me about what they were using the gear on. And I was just amazed that it worked. They were raving about how well it worked on, say, recovering, some old outtakes from an Elvis Presley album.
Wow.
And how this just brought it to life. Or some tracks that Paul Simon had cut somewhere in the Caribbean. There was a really bad recording technique, and they were able to salvage it using, our equalizers. So that's, I mean, who could hope for anything more than that in
I
a
know.
lifetime?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I think something that's so cool, and so I haven't spent time with the mic pre or EQ, but as you know, I've spent a lot of time with the compressor, being that we just did the plugin of it, and it's so charming and so musical. Like it's clean. I want to say it's fast and not fast at the same time, because it kind of does both, but it's just so cunning sounding. Like it's so hard to describe. Like it's not gooey, slow, tubey. Like it's very, I don't even know. It's very esoteric. It's hard to describe, but I kind of have a mix bus that a lot of customers kind of request. I'll just say it. It's the SSL. A lot of people ask for the SSL thing, especially when you're working on rock and metal. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, all right, well, so I have my setting on that. I have some mixes that I've done with that. Let me get this VT-7 on and kind of find out what this is all about. Well, guess what? It's way wider. It's way more open. It's warmer. It's faster. It's more slick. It's crazy. And I don't know what you intended it for, but you can totally get it to work in rock music. And you can get it better than the SSL. Like you go to the SSL and it just sounds kind of pinched, like you're pinching your nose, like it's just kind of small and nasally. And then this one, it's like when you turn it off and it's just the master fader as itself, and then you turn it on, you're not losing frequency response. Like most compressors, you'll lose kind of the low end of the kick, or something will get kind of pinched. That doesn't happen here at all. It's almost like it's exactly the same, but it's just better. It's got a little bit of the glue. It almost feels wider, and it's just very cunning sounding. It's very magical. So, yeah, I don't know what your intent was for the VT-7, but it is, and I've never heard anything like it. I couldn't tell you another compressor that sounds the same.
There's so many different compressors out there, and I've used them over the years. Each one of them has a particular sound, and sometimes that's exactly the sound you need.
Yep.
And so there's certainly a place in the world for those different flavors.
Yep.
But what I wanted was something that would handle the levels, control the levels without being obvious about what it was doing.
Yeah.
I always said that it was like having the world's most tasteful engineer with the most rapid responses in his fingers riding the game.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted. And it was interesting when I got the first prototype working and I ran some music through it, and I'm turning up the threshold control, adding more compression to it. And I'm thinking, oh, this isn't really doing what I thought. It's not doing very much, until you bypass it and you say, oh, wait, it was doing a lot.
It's worse when it's off.
Yeah. And it's like it doesn't get in the way of the music.
Yes.
And, I attribute a lot of that just to my upbringing. You talked about your growing up and the influences, from your family. My father played in the Philadelphia Orchestra. And from a young age, I was probably 3 or 4, I think, he used to take me to rehearsals. And I would sit there in this great concert hall in Philadelphia and hear, one of the best orchestras that ever existed on earth playing music. And none of it came out of loudspeakers. It was just in a room, in this great sounding room with these phenomenal players. And that imprinted on me what music should sound like.
Yeah.
since my father didn't like recorded music, we had no way to listen to recorded music at home. So except for what came, through a television speaker, I never really heard recorded music until I was in high school. So my frame of reference is very different. And for that reason, I hear distortion in everything.
Yep.
And I'm sure you've experienced this as well. In the studio, as you upgrade your studio and get better and better gear, you say, oh, I got these new monitor speakers that sound phenomenal, but now my condenser mics are driving me up the wall because there's so much distortion in them.
Yep.
You multiply that by any number of things that change in your studio. But if you're sensitive to those things, it requires you to do something about it. And for me, I thought that I could do something about it. And I didn't know whether it would be a business or not, but I figured in the worst case, I'd have all this great gear to use for myself. And, it was all in the interest of eliminating the irritants and keeping the music sounding like music.
I guess I'm kind of thinking something here. It's like, I think what's cool is you kind of came from both mediums, right? Like it's for me, I started recording in 2006, and I've maybe worked with a tape machine once years after I had already started. I started on Pro Tools. And so like I only come from that medium, and that's kind of all I know. Mm-hmm. But I've also noticed this thing. So like I'll listen like an iconic artist put something out that's new, and I'm like, there's just no magic to it. I was listening to like some more recent Tom Petty stuff, mm-hmm. and I thought, man, there's just something missing now. It's clean, it sounds good, it's high fidelity, but something's gone. And then I kind of wondered to myself, well, is that because the medium's changed? Is it that when they recorded before to the tape, you're talking about that background noise, all the things that it imparts on it, are those things filling the void and kind of creating magic, and now you're hearing it in such a stripped down, raw way? Or were those things hiding the irritants that you're talking about with the solid state gear? They kind of found a way to kind of bury everything together, because I'm hearing these iconic artists do music nowadays and all the magic is gone. I mean, what's your thought on that?
Well, I agree. I guess it's now I'm a little bit past halfway through my career in the digital world.
Yep.
And the first half of it was in the analog tape world. And I don't want to go back to tape. In my control room, there's a piece of 1/4-inch tape from some project I had to do recently from some old recording. There's a little chunk that was spliced out. And I just have it hanging up there. It's just to remind me, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great things about tape, but it's such a pain.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to go back to it. I had a similar reaction to my first exposure to digital audio as I did to solid state, which was, whoa, what happened to it? As a consequence, for all the recording I do, not for the podcast, but for everything I do, we record in DSD. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a totally different approach to recording digital audio. Uses extremely high sample rate, 11.2 megahertz. It just has a totally different feel to it. To me, that sounds like the analog world without all the defects of analog. It has many of the advantages of digital, but when you deal with PCM digital, the typical waveform format that everybody uses, a WAV file, there's things in that I hear that have always bothered me. I think one example that illustrated this to me was when I was recording in PCM. fairly high resolution, depending on the era, what the highest resolution was available. I would always end up scooping out the mid-range. Not a whole lot, but it needed some. It just cleaned things up so much. Everything just sounded so much better. And it wasn't until somebody explained to me that what you're hearing are aliasing products in the PCM that are translated down into that range of the audio spectrum. And they have no relationship to the original audio. They're not harmonically related in any way. Once I said, that seems plausible, it explained a lot. But I don't hear that in DSD. I mean, DSD has a huge number of drawbacks, but that's not one of them. So I think that explains a lot of why older recordings just feel different.
Yeah, I see like even a band that re-records something later on, it's like all the feel is gone. And I'm like, maybe that's the tape. There's some kind of compression to tape. There's something that happens where it kind of smooths it out and brings up some background sound of the instrument. I mean, for better or for worse, you hear those songs and they feel so alive and so musical. And then you hear the song re-recorded nowadays and it's like just flat. Like there's something's missing, And I wonder too, it's like you've designed these tools to be the front end for what's happening nowadays. I know everybody's not using the preamps you make, but could this be that? Because you look at like most people use like a Neve 1073 clone and they're trying to keep the schematic the same. They don't have the transformers right. I'm sure a lot of the parts have changed, but that wasn't designed to be recorded on a digital interface. So it's like, could it just be that the preamps and the things that people are using nowadays aren't designed around that? And maybe that's why they're harsher, or that's, the people didn't test them on a digital format because it didn't exist,
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting question. And I've had, back when he was alive, multiple conversations with Rupert Neve about audio in general, not about the products I make, not about the products he makes, but just in general. And, he started in the vacuum tube era, but he realized you can't build a console with vacuum tubes. It's just, it theoretically could be possible, but it'd just be outrageously expensive and complicated. And he never specifically said this to me, but I think he was always trying to make solid state sound more like the tube or valve technology, as he would call it. It was a different thing. That might explain some of it, but there's other aspects of it that I just don't know. What else has changed? Basically everything.
Yeah.
We still use a lot of the same mics, but
not on the same medium.
Right. And even
most
if
mics are clones.
Right. That's what my point was. They may be a reasonably accurate reproduction of some classic microphone, but are they really the same sound? And if you've ever compared them, the new ones sound really, really good, but the old ones had some magic to them. It's totally amazing to me that the first real high-fidelity microphone that existed on Earth was the RCA 44, which is still, my favorite microphone of anything. That's what I use to record the podcast, and I use it on vocals for all the people I'm recording, almost exclusively. Occasionally, I'll use something else if I want a slightly different sound. Think about that. That mic's nearly 90 years old from its original design, and it still sounds remarkable.
It reminds me of the Fender Telecaster. It like came out in 1950. It's like they haven't really found a way to make it any better than it was in the 50s,
That's right.
It's crazy.
Well, I mean, the mic I'm using now is AEA's version of it,
Okay.
which is really superb. I mean, Wes Dooley, who I've known for decades, started making his version of the 44 because they had been repairing them for many, many years, and they had all the parts to replace anything in an old 44. So he just decided, well, we could just take all the parts off the shelf and make a brand new mic. And so they've recreated it really, really well. You know, you'd have to talk to him to learn some of the details about how they did that, but it's pretty amazing how accurately they reproduced it. The other thing is that there were tens of thousands of 44s made over the years. I mean, that mic was in production for 40 some years.
Wow.
And so there's plenty of them out there, and there's people restoring them, and you can get one that's been refurbished, you know, mostly original, but probably new ribbon material and maybe some other things inside that needed replacing. But it's essentially the same as it originally was. You know, I actually prefer the sound of this mic to one of those restored old 44s, and I can't tell you why. I think we have better magnets today, more powerful magnets.
Yep.
Transformers are better. Certainly manufacturing tolerances can be much tighter because with computer-controlled machines, you know, they can make stuff that's consistent to a thousandth of an inch all day long.
Yep.
And that wasn't the case when those mics were made. I just had another question for you, getting back to the world of plugins.
Sure.
And that is, can you talk about the challenge of creating a plugin from existing hardware? I mean, you had that challenge when you were making a plug-in version or a VT-7 compressor, but what's the process? What are the challenges there?
Oh, that was a toughie. And I'll go back a little bit because I remember when I was younger and starting out, and I would buy a piece of gear and there was a plug-in version of it, you know, from one of the big guys, and I would put the same settings, send it out into the real one, and then listen to the plugin, and it never sounded the same to me. And okay, so there's a couple things that you got to think about here. One, I mean, we're talking about plugins from 2007, 2008, so maybe the technology wasn't there quite as much then, but maybe the unit that they were modeling it off of, like we were speaking about earlier, you have tolerances in potentiometers. Like I could buy two compressors that are exactly the same, and maybe noon on one is 1 o'clock on the other. So there's always going to be some discrepancy. But back then, I was kind of like, there's really nothing that makes me feel like this is the same as the analog hardware. And I kind of learned to accept that and maybe achieve the same thing using different plugins in a different manner. Oh, if I use this harmonic plugin and this EQ, this kind of gets me the nature of this channel strip, but the actual clone of it sounds nothing like it. Fast forward to now, when Jeff and I made the company, we got a dev team that, you know, the main guy is an absolute genius, and he's put most of his work in the guitar amp field. And so he kind of invented like one of the first early plugins. I believe he sold it to a company, Amplitude or something early on or something like that. But anyways, this guy was super into guitar amps and getting the feel and the top end, because a lot of people would model things and you could do the Waves Q clone type of way where it runs a sine sweep, analyzes it, and like the treble would be weird, or it would just sound like pink noise, but like tuned to your thing. And so we thought, why don't we throw some of this pro audio stuff at him and see how this translates? So we start feeding him schematics of things that shouldn't be digital. Like, you know, we have these coil amplifiers, which are based on old Gates schematics or old RCA schematics of I think preamps from like the 1930s or 40s or something like that. But anyways, you know, this is like the really colorful kind of sounding stuff that is largely dependent on the parts that are being used. And he sends us back a beta of one of these, and we're just floored by it because we're like, it's so, the nature is there, the feel is there, it's so close. Okay, maybe the hardware is brighter, or, you know, maybe there's small tweaks, but it's there. And so we kind of got onto something with that, and we're having all this luck with the pro audio stuff. And then now we get to your stuff where, well, first we did stuff with Hazelrig where, you know, it's the PWM. That's kind of the tough one. There's not a whole lot of plugins that do that. Okay, so that's one thing to tackle. But then also like how complex your stuff sounds. It's so clean, but there's so many nuances and so many little things about it. And so it's very delicate and kind of tough to do. Well, okay, we nailed the VNE. We're very proud of that. We're thinking with the VT-7, well, we nailed the VNE. We should totally be able to do the VT-7. Well, guess what? Those units can sound wildly different from each other. I know they're similar. I know it's a channel from it, but man, I can I can get completely different sounds out of them, and it's kind of shocking for me. And that's kind of where, you know, when we got the VT-7 unit, we thought, oh wow, okay, so when you turn the knob to the softer side of things, it really gets different. And it took us about 15 or 16 back and forth to finally get it there. And it was this one was tough to do, but it was like things that you can't put into words. Like it was like, okay, the harmonics are there. We got that. We're measuring that. Okay, the attack and release, we're measuring that. But somehow when I'm in this softer mode, the transients don't bite as hard on the music. And like there's no technical way to figure that out. So we're just in the back end of this thing, just tweaking and tweaking. And then finally, okay, we got the softer side nailed. Now when we move the attack here, it kind of does this. And so we really just kind of honed it into the unit that I had here. And the dev team had the other unit, and we just went back and forth, back and forth. And to tell you the truth, I don't think it's a technical thing that happened. I think we just hit on something where it was like, because I had the real unit on my mix bus on a particular mix, and I was kind of listening to the way it felt when I was going to certain settings, and I would quickly switch to the plugin. And at, I think, revision 15 or 16, it was like, oh wow, that feels exactly the same. Like we got it. Like I just ran through my house and screamed, because we got very close before that. We got super close, but I was like, it's just this little thing. It should be simple. Well, it was 10 more revisions after that. It was, you know, some of them walked in a parallel kind of opposite direction, and man, it was tough, but it's very rewarding because that is truly a special piece of gear.
Well, that's great. I think you guys did a phenomenal job on it. You know, as soon as it was available, you sent me the early version of it. Well, I mean, when you were ready to send it, and I put it on the mix bus or something with a VT-7, and I could just very easily switch between them. Does it sound exactly the same? Nope. But it's awful close. Probably more importantly, does it feel the same? And it pretty much does. I think if you were to take some random piece of music and make me do a blind A/B test, I'd probably have a hard time telling you for sure.
That's where we got to, where there's a couple things kind of going on where I think somebody who owns a VT-7 could set the same settings, and it might not be exactly the same, but we kind of found out, like, on this unit with the threshold here, the plug-in threshold needs to actually be there, but it's much closer to the other unit. Like for me, I can get them to sound the same, but not with the same settings. Like the settings are slightly different, and then I can close my eyes and then I don't tell a difference.
Yep.
If
That's exactly what I discovered.
Yeah.
So the usual places I would set the controls, they don't match up precisely. But you can certainly find it if you just do a little experimenting and get it to where you want it. But, most people aren't going to sit there A-Bing it with the hardware. So the important thing is, can they get the sound they want? Yeah, and that harder, softer control, which I'm sure you figured out, is really a pan pop between two different side chains.
Ah.
And the two side chains have very different characteristics. They have different ratios. They have different shape of the knee. You've noticed that as you change that control from one end to the other, that you get different ways the attack and release respond.
Yeah, and it's different depending on how hard you're hitting it too.
Right. That was something that originally we were going to give people a choice. You could use this side chain or you could use that side chain. But I could see times where something in between would make more sense. In the middle position of that control basically is a 50-50 blend between those two side chains.
Wow.
So it's a combination of different ratio, different attack and release, and different shape of the knee. When on the VNE, we decided to simplify it and just essentially make that control in its center position, which is a very useful position and works great especially on a mix bus. It's like where I am almost all the time. If anything, I'll go to a little bit to the softer side, but
yeah, I'm at 2 o'clock, which is just a little bit towards the softer side.
Yep.
It's amazing. And I love the fast release, and I like the attack at like all the way to the right, maybe 3 o'clock. Yeah, I would say maybe 3 o'clock. But you know what I noticed too is you can't really find a bad setting on it. I'll turn it to harder and I'm like, this is cool too.
Yeah, I know. One of the things that I do in all the stuff that I design is I want to make it almost impossible for somebody to make it sound bad.
I need to try your EQ because that's something I love when you find an EQ and it's not possible to make it sound bad. Like you can turn whatever band and it's always musical,
Yeah. Well, that's important to me because I know how this stuff is used in the studio. Not universally, but a lot of people are under a lot of time pressure.
Yeah.
And they have to dial in what they need quickly.
Yeah.
And if the thing is hard to adjust, if the control knobs are little and fiddly and a tiny little movement of a knob makes a big difference in the sound, that's not helpful to people.
Yep.
So I tried to make everything so that it was easy to adjust. It was very sort of intuitive how to adjust it. And, the threshold on the VT-7, even if you turn that all the way up, the maximum compression is only about 20 dB, which is plenty. I mean, who would never need any more than that?
No.
But that circuit can do 60 dB of super clean compression.
Yeah.
But we limited the range of it. I just decided, no, nobody's going to need that. And it just makes the control hard to adjust. And they're going to get in trouble if they figure, a little bit's good, let's turn it up all the way.
Yep.
It still sounds great, but it's going to pull out every little bit of noise in your signal chain.
Oh, yeah.
So I limited it to about 20 dB, but the circuit's capable of much more than that. I've been talking with MixWave founder Taylor Larson. MixWave just released a plug-in version of the Fearn VT-7 Compressor. Taylor and I talked about many more things, which may become a second podcast episode in the future. Thanks for listening, commenting, and subscribing. Your comments and suggestions for future episodes are always useful to me. I can be reached at dwfearn@dwfearn.com. This is my take on music recording. I'm Doug Fearn. See you next time.